and welcome to Based on a True Story, the podcast that compares your favorite Hollywood movies with history. Today we're going to learn about the 2016 movie called War Dogs. Directed by Todd Phillips, War Dogs is a biographical comedy crime film based on a Rolling Stone article by Guy Lawson. It tells the true story of two 20-something young men as they win a $300 million contract from the U.S. military to arm America's allies in Afghanistan. Those two men are David Packouz, who's played by Miles Teller in the movie, and Efraim Diveroli, who's played by Jonah Hill. Now, in case it's been a little bit since you've seen the movie, we'll kick it off with a quick synopsis. The movie starts with David working as a massage therapist and struggling to start a new business in 2005. Then he runs into a childhood friend, Efraim, who is running a one-man company called AEY, selling equipment to the U.S. military. When David finds out that he has a new child on the way, he gives up on his own business and instead joins Efraim's already successful company. As their business grows, the pair quickly find themselves getting in over their heads as they deal with shady suppliers and dubious arms dealers. The biggest deal in the movie, the Afghan deal that I mentioned a moment ago, ultimately ends up leading to their demise as they purposely repackage Chinese ammunition to sell it to the United States, something that the movie points out goes against an arms embargo. Then at the very end of the movie, we see federal prosecutors arresting both Efraim and David because of it. To help us separate fact from fiction in the movie, we'll be joined by one of the real people from the movie, none other than David Packouz. Today, David is the CEO of Singular Sound, which he founded after the exploits that we see happening in the movie. And he'll explain that transition near the end of our chat. But before we chat with David, let's set up our game. Two truths and a lie. Now, if you're new to the show, here's how it works. I'm going to give you three things. Two of them are true, and that means one of them is just an all-out lie. Are you ready? Okay, here they are. Number one, AEY doesn't really stand for anything like Efraim says in the movie. Number two, the movie's screenwriter was the one who drove through the triangle of death, not David and Efraim. Number three, David was not shoved into a trunk by Henry Gerard like we see in the movie. Got him? Okay, now as you're listening to our story today, your challenge is to identify which one of those is the lie, and then of course we'll do a recap at the end of the episode to see how well you did. All right, now it's time to connect with David Packouz about the historical accuracy of War Dogs. Let's start by looking at the movie overall to get an idea for how well it does capturing the essence of the true story. If you were to give War Dogs a letter grade for historical accuracy, what would it get?
A letter grade. I would give it a C.
A C? Okay.
A C. Yeah,
okay.
I would say the broad strokes of the story are true. Even a lot of the details are true, but there are some major changes that they made. Some character changes, some things they put in there that never happened, and they left out plenty of things that did happen. So I would say I would give it a C. Maybe a C plus. I'll give it a C plus. I'll be generous.
Okay. Be generous. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, near the beginning of the movie, it kind of sets everything up to show how your character in the movie then becomes a gun runner. It starts with Miles Teller's version of you working as a massage therapist in Miami in 2005 and trying to start up a business selling bed sheets to retirement homes. Then there's a sequence of events that lead to working with AEY as an arms dealer. It starts in the movie with a childhood friend, Efraim Diveroli. He moves back to Miami, runs into you at a funeral. Doesn't seem to be coincidental, according to the movie. After that, Iz gets pregnant. That's your character's girlfriend in the movie. And since the bed sheets business isn't really taking off, Efraim offers a job at his company, AEY. And we find out that's a one-man operation. He wants to bring you on. According to the movie, basically he's okay with living off the crumbs, as he puts it in the movie. There's these big government contracts and he's just this one-man thing, but he brings you on and he mentions that he makes like $200,000 in the past 8 weeks. So with a child on the way, that becomes a very tempting offer. How well did this movie do kind of setting up this scenario to you working at AEY?
It's overall true, but there are some significant differences in what actually happens. Um, at the time that first of all, I didn't meet Efraim at the funeral. It's a cool scene in the movie, but I actually bumped into him. So we had known each other since we were kids. That is true. We went to the same synagogue, and neither of us liked to pray. So we'd sneak out during prayers and hang out on the basketball courts and with all the other kids who didn't like to pray, which was most of them. So so that's how we knew each other. But when he was 16, he got sent over to work for his uncle in LA. His uncle owns a big pawn shop, and that's how he got obsessed with guns and government contracts. And he learned the business from his uncle. When he was 18, he came back to Miami. He claims his uncle screwed him out of a whole bunch of money. His uncle claims that he screwed him out of a bunch of money. They're both well-known scumbags, so I believe both of them. He started his own business in Miami. He took over his dad's business, AEY Inc., which does stand for something, by the way, unlike in the movie.
What does IBM stand for? It doesn't stand for anything.
Yeah, exactly. So AEY stands for the initials of his dad's three sons, Avrami, Efraim, and Yeshaya. So the E in AEY is Ephraim's initial. And so, he named it after his three sons. And AEY was his dad incorporated to use it as some sort of like label printing business, but hadn't been doing any business with the corporate structure. So he'd let it go dormant. And so when Efraim came back, he took over the company and registered it with the federal government, started bidding contracts, and started doing really well. This was like 2004, right after the invasion of Iraq. So there was lots of government spending going on in Iraq, and a lot of it was going to small business because the whole scandal with like Halliburton, with Dick Cheney was the vice president of the United States, and he used to be the CEO of Halliburton, and they gave Halliburton a whole bunch of multi-billion-dollar contracts without any competition, and so they increased. So to counteract that, they increased the amount that was set aside for small business, which of course Efraim qualified. So he started doing really well. After about a year of him working on his own in Miami is when I bumped into him. And I bumped into him at a mutual friends of ours, a house. And we were both smoking weed with our mutual friend. And he asked me, hey, what you doing these days? And so I told him I was, at the time I was in college, I was studying chemistry. And I had a few businesses going. I was working part-time as a massage therapist. That part is true. I did occasionally have gay clients do inappropriate things, but nothing too crazy. That towel thing did actually happen to me. That did happen. Very, very rarely. It was very rare. By and large, all my clients were very respectful and professional. I had my main businesses at the time was selling SD cards online. I was buying them in bulk from China and selling them on eBay. And through that, I got into selling bed sheets and linens and towels because one of my friends said, hey, I know you're doing SD cards. You have experience in finding suppliers overseas and importing things. And I have a distribution business selling bed sheets and towels to nursing homes. So if you can get me a better price than my distributors, I'm happy to buy from you. So I started researching it. I found a bunch of manufacturers, got really good prices, did arranged logistics, and started selling it to him. And in real life, I was actually selling successfully bed sheets and linens, and I never took delivery of them. I never filled my house up with boxes of bed sheets. That never happened. Pretty much, I was just a broker. I would make a deal with the buyer and make a deal with the supplier and just do the deal. I never even took possession. I didn't even have to put up my own money. It was a transferable letter of credit, they call it. So it's just the bank held the money in escrow and released it to the seller as soon as the goods were confirmed to be loaded aboard the ship. So I was doing pretty well, actually. At the time, I had about $100,000 to my name, which is not bad, especially for someone who's 23 years old. It was way more money than most of my friends had. And I thought I was hot shit. I thought I was like, pretty good at this business thing. And then I bumped into Efraim, and he asked me, what you doing? And so I told him, and he's like, oh, that stuff, that's actually very similar to what I'm doing, finding suppliers overseas, arranging logistics, licensing, import export permits, figuring out the financing, setting it all up. You're doing pretty much everything I'm doing, except I bet I'm making way more money than you. And I'm like, oh yeah? He's like, yeah, I'm making way more money than you. So you should I'm actually looking for somebody to work with me. Could use a guy like you, like you're a smart guy. I can trust you. We've known each other forever. Come work with me and we'll make way more money together. And I said, well, I mean, that's interesting, but how much money have you made? And so he opens up his laptop and shows me his Bank of America bank account. And he has $1.8 million of cash in the bank. And he was 18 years old at the time. He's actually younger than me. He's about 4 years younger than me. I was 22. He was 18. We were both our birthdays are close to each other. So he was about to turn 19. I was about to turn 23. And so I couldn't believe it because I knew that he had made that money on his own. I knew his family. I know they're not his parents aren't rich. His grandfather's a billionaire, but his grandfather is one of these insane people who gives nobody anything. Like even his own ex-wife, he tried to screw her out of giving her any alimony at all after they'd been married for 40 years. It's a famous case. He's a very Scrooge. He's Iranian, his grandfather. And his grandfather was married to this is a little side story. His grandfather was married to his grandmother for I think 40 years. They had 8 or 9 kids together. And then she decided to divorce him, I think because she claimed he was physically abusing her, something like that. And so she tried to divorce him. And it turned out that they had never been legally married. They had just been, she didn't realize it. But they had never been legally married. They were only religiously married. And even though they had 9 kids together, according to the state of California, they're not legally married. So he decided that he was going to give her zero money, zero help, anything. And so she sued him. It was the biggest alimony lawsuit in history. I think she sued him for $700 million. Yeah. So anyway, that's the family he comes from. But I know that his grandfather, if he won't give anything to his ex-wife, doesn't give anything to anyone else. So I knew he had earned that money himself, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, I thought my $100,000 in the bank was amazing and way better than everyone else my age. And that is true. Most people who are 22 years old don't earn $100,000. But it was nothing compared to 1.8 million. And I wanted to know what he was doing. I wanted to know. I figured this guy knows how to make money and I want to learn. So I told him, yeah, I'm in. Let's do this. And so that's how I got into it.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense, and it's very different than the idea that we get in the movie of all the bed sheets stacked up and everything like that.
Yeah. And my daughter wasn't even. I didn't even know my girlfriend was pregnant at that by that time.
Okay,
that happened later.
Okay, that was going to be one question.
Yeah, they shifted the timeline around so that it would be more dramatic in the movie.
Okay. And in the movie, since obviously we know you are real, speaking of a girlfriend, in the movie, the character's name is, and then there's another one that is kind of a big part to the way this is set up. Ralph Slutsky, who is a dry cleaner owner and kind of puts the money back into the deals in exchange for 25% of the company. Are they based on real people too?
They are. My ex-girlfriend is based on my ex-wife, Sarah. And that's her real name is Sarah. And she didn't look anything like Anna Darmus. I'm sorry to disappoint everybody, but she was very beautiful. She was, but she looked a lot more like Halle Berry than Anna Darmus. My ex-wife, Sarah, she was half black. So she was a mulatto. Her dad was a white Spaniard guy, and her mom was from Equatorial Guinea, which is near Nigeria. So, and she did grow up in Madrid, so she does have the same accent as Ana de Armas. So at least they got that. But she looks very different. Just very different skin color, I should say, is the main thing. Ralph is based on a real guy. In the movie, his name is Ralph Slutsky, and he's a Jewish dry cleaner owner. In real life, his name is Ralph in real life, actually. They didn't change his first name, but his last name in real life is Merrill. And he is a Mormon machine gun factory owner. He doesn't own any dry cleaners. He owns a machine gun factory out in Utah. And so that's how he got connected to Efraim, through Ephraim's dad. Actually, Ephraim's dad was doing some business and got in contact with this guy and introduced him. And so Ralph was Ephraim's first investor. And when Efraim won his first federal contract, Ralph financed the contract. And so that's how they got started.
That actually makes a lot more sense than a dry cleaner owner being involved in this too. That was like, okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
One of the first big contracts that we see happening after you join AEY is, the movie calls it the Beretta deal. It's, as the movie sets it up, it's a $600,000 contract to sell 5,000 Beretta pistols to the U.S. Army in Baghdad during the Iraq War. But then there's a problem. Of course, there's always problems that happen in movies. And this happens just before the deal is about to go through. Italy passes some legislation banning arms shipments to Iraq. Berettas are an Italian gun, so they can't be sent directly to Iraq. So instead, in the movie, Efraim has the idea to ship the guns to Iraq's neighboring country to the west, Jordan, and then from there, take them to Baghdad. Another problem pops up when the Jordanian customs sees the shipment because of a permit issue. So then we see Efraim and yourself in the movie fly to Jordan to try to fast track this new permit. Ends up with the two of you and a local driver named Marlboro actually driving a truckload of Berettas from Jordan to Baghdad, nearly getting killed in Fallujah in the process. How well does the movie do showing this Beretta deal?
So the Beretta deal was real. We really did have a Beretta deal, and it really did get stopped by the Italian legislation. However, what Efraim tried to do was not ship it from Jordan to Iraq. He tried to get the government to take a alternative gun. I think it was like a Brazilian gun. I think he actually mentions it in the movie.
There's one brief line. I think he's on the phone with the guy.
Exactly. Yeah. And they rejected it, as they did in the movie. But then we didn't manage to deliver on that. In fact, we defaulted on that contract. So that contract failed. We did not deliver that successfully. However, the story of going through the triangle of death is real, but it didn't happen to us. It happened to the screenwriter of the War Dog screenplay, Stephen Chin. So Stephen Chin, who is a Asian man from California, he originally got the job. He got the contract to write the War Dog screenplay because he had written another screenplay prior to that called Iraq. And that screenplay, which was never turned into a movie, it was a well-regarded screenplay. It was about another two American guys who were government contractors working in Iraq at the time. And this was in 2003, and right after the invasion. And Stephen wanted to write this screenplay about them, and he wanted to go interview them and see how they were doing. So, of course, he couldn't get a commercial flight to Iraq. So he flew to Jordan, and he hired a driver to drive him to Baghdad. And that driver decided to stop in Fallujah to get some free gas because no one was manning the gas stations. And they got shot at by insurgents and made a run for it. And they got saved by the U.S. Army, just like in the movie. So that story is actually true. It just happened to the screenwriter of the screenplay, not to us. And when he was writing the screenplay, Todd Phillips, the director, tells him, hey, these guys are just sitting behind desks too much. We need some action in there. Why don't you put your story about getting shot at in Iraq into the story? And so that's how that got into the movie.
Well, I was going to ask about in that, like in the movie, of course, maybe it wasn't you driving through the Triangle of Death, but there was a scene where that happens, where your character just kind of reflects on, man, 6 months ago, I was a massage therapist and now I'm driving a truckload of guns through the Iraqi desert. Can you kind of give what your mindset was like in those early months? Like, did you kind of realize this whirlwind of events or things that were happening like the movie seems to imply?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that my biggest kind of like shock or realization that I was in a very different world was when was our first trade show that we went to. So we went to just in the movie they call it Vegas X. But there was a trade show in Vegas called the SHOT Show. I believe it's still going on, but it's not actually a military focused trade show. It's more of a commercial hunting, shooting sports trade show. So gun manufacturers do go to that trade show, but it's more aimed at the civilian market. Henry, the guy played by Bradley Cooper, did meet us there. We did, but we had known him well before that. We'd been doing business with him over the phone and by email for a good bunch of months before we met him. But we did meet him in person there. So he also attended that trade show. But the trade show that they make it look like is not the SHOT Show. They make it look like more of a military trade show and a defense industry trade show. And I believe they're basing it more on a trade show such as Eurosatori, which is based in Paris. And that's the one we went to first. That was our first military trade show. And Eurosatori in Paris happens every year. There's a bunch of these trade shows that happen all over the world. But it really does look like what they portrayed in the movie with tanks and aircraft and attack helicopters, and pretty much every major arms manufacturer has a booth there, and they have outside in a field they have live demonstrations of live fire drills with attack helicopters and tanks jumping sand dunes and stuff like that, and drones. So they really do have that. And so when I was walking through that show and I was like, holy crap, this is a whole different world than what I'm used to and where I'm coming from. So that's when it really hit me.
Okay. Well, I'm curious about something that in the movie, the Beretta deal, you said that failed. So maybe things were a little bit different. But in the movie, after that, we see AEY is expanding, has nice new offices and more employees being hired. And I was kind of confused with how the movie was telling the story here, because on one hand, we see Efraim in the movie telling new employees that they have to watch the website all the time for contracts. We also see the employees aren't really doing any contracts themselves. The movie shows you being the one to find the next big contract, the Afghan contract as it's called, on the government website. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But after the Beretta contract, it sounded like that fell through. Was there a big contract that changed to see AEY expanding, or what were things like after that time?
So our first really big contract that we won, I should say after the Beretta deal, was the Afghan contract. Now, we didn't actually hire anyone or even get an office until after we won that contract. So, the timeline's a little off in the movie, but before we won the Afghan contract, we were working out of Efraim's apartment. And it was only after we won the $300 million deal that he felt comfortable spending $2,000 a month on an office. And I know. And and so once we won that deal, we rented an office, and then he started hiring people. And at our peak, we probably had around 15 people working in the office. And so, yeah, I mean, and by that point, I was just concentrating on working on the Afghan deal, and he was getting all the other people in the offices to try to get other deals and new deals, and he was also doing some commercial deals, like importing ammo for the shooting sports commercial market and getting them to sell it to like gun shops and stuff like that.
I want to talk about the Afghan contract, and in the movie, the way that sets up, I'll talk about how that sets it up. It shows that there's this big deal for 360,000 sniper rifles, over 1 million grenades, 45,000 rockets, 100 million rounds of AK-47 ammunition. And the reason it's called the Afghan deal, it's nicknamed for it, is because this is all for the U.S. military to rearm the Afghan army. Now, according to the movie, it mentions all those guns and stuff at first, but then it really just kind of focuses on the 100 million rounds of ammo for the rest of the movie. Were you involved in the whole contract, or was it just the ammo? Can you kind of clarify what your role was in that?
Yeah, so I was involved in the whole contract. And it was about 30 different, it was all munitions. It wasn't any weapons. It was all munitions. So all the stuff that goes in the weapons. And it was everything from, like, as you mentioned, it was everything from like pistol ammo to machine gun ammo to grenades to anti-aircraft rockets, mortar rounds, tank rounds. So there was pretty much every bit of munitions that an army or police force would need for like the next 30 years was the plan. That was what they were going for. And because the Bush administration thought that they were very unpopular at the time, and they figured the next president would be a Democrat, which they were right. Obama was next, but they thought that the next Democratic president would pull out of Afghanistan immediately, and which they were wrong. Took until was 2020 Biden pulled out, and so their plan was to arm the Afghans for like the next 30 years, so they wouldn't run out of ammo if they got abandoned by the United States. And so that's why they had such a large variety and quantity of munitions for this contract. I was working on the entire thing, and we had sources all over to get it. In fact, the AK-47 ammo was one of the lowest margin items on the list. So we were making the least amount of money on that ammo. It was the largest quantity and largest logistics challenge because it was high volume, low value. But the grenades were making us way more money. And the grenades were brand new manufacturing. One of my contacts in Bulgaria was manufacturing brand new. And they had really, really good prices. And so we were making way more money on the grenades than on the AK-47 ammo. And the grenades had no legal issues whatsoever because they were brand new right out of Bulgaria. So yeah, I mean, I was working on all of it. It was just, it got focused on the AK-47 ammo was because it was of the famous logistics issues that we dealt with in the whole repackaging situation.
Okay. Yeah, because the impression that I got from the movie, because it really only focuses on the ammo, but it also shows like the Albanian warehouses full of stuff. I was just like, well, maybe they just got all the other stuff from here too. It was just like a big everything all in one from these warehouses.
No, most of the stuff we got that other than the AK-47 and some of the machine gun ammo, the 7.62x54 ammo, that was mostly from other places. So it was just really the AK-47 and machine gun ammo, the AKM ammo that we got from Albania. And another difference in real life, they didn't store all that stuff in a warehouse. They stored it underground in these really long bunkers. And Albania, as they mentioned in the movie, it was run by this paranoid dictator for most of the Cold War, who he withdrew from the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union tends not to like that. So he thought that he would get invaded by the Soviet Union. And because he was a staunch communist, he thought that that NATO would invade him too. So he thought he was going to get invaded by the world's two superpowers, and he's a tiny little country near Greece. And so he allied himself with the Chinese and got a massive amount of ammo from the Chinese. and weapons and stuff. And that's how all that ammo ended up being Chinese. And what he did was he built this huge underground network of bunkers so that and put all the ammo and weapons in there so that they would be safe from bombardment from the air. And his plan was that if he got invaded, the entire population would become soldiers and everyone would fight to the death. He called it his total war plan. Yeah, that was his plan. So, of course, the war never came. So after the Cold War ended, all those weapons and ammo were still in those bunkers. And by 2007, NATO really wanted to join. Albania really wanted to join NATO. And one of NATO's requirements is that Albania get rid of all their old ammo and weapons. So they were going to have to pay to dismantle all of it, which was going to cost them a lot of money. And so they were thrilled to sell it instead, because then they make money instead of lose money. And so that's how we got such an amazing price.
And we had talked about this a little bit before when you mentioned Henry Girard and Vegas X. And in the movie, we see how the Afghan deal is going to be completed. It mentions Henry Girard, Bradley Cooper's character, and you're meeting with Girard at Vegas X, and he says that he's going to supply all 100 million rounds of ammo for the Afghan deal from that military surplus in Albania. But Girard can't bid on the contract himself because he's been added to the terrorist watch list by the US government. So basically, he's going to sell the ammo to AEY, who then turns it around and sells it to the US government. And that's how the movie sets up that basically that was how you're going to complete the Afghan deal. Was that a pretty good interpretation of how it really happened?
More or less. I don't think he was on a terrorist watch list. He was on I don't know what the official what term was, but he was like on a list of concern, so to speak, by Amnesty International, right? So not by the US government. So Amnesty International had published some things about him that they suspected him of being involved in the arms trade to Africa and to some warlords. And obviously that would be bad. But I don't think anything was ever proven. And so he was not legally, I don't know exactly why he never registered with the federal government and did any of these things himself, but he was dealing with quite a few different contractors. It wasn't just us. He was also selling to other American companies as well. And we just happened to be very competitive with the other items on the contract, not just those items. So we had really good prices on grenades, and that helped us win, and as well as other things. We just had an overall package than our competitors, and that's how we won. He wasn't really the magic bullet that took care of everything. He really just took care of the AK ammo and the machine gun ammo.
Okay, because that's exactly what he seems like, is the magic bullet. He's got everything, and he'll give you everything for a deal.
Yeah, I mean, it was an very important component of the contract, but yeah, it was not, as they portrayed in the movie, like a turnkey thing where he took care of everything, and we only had one supplier, and it was him. That wasn't the case. He was just the supplier of those items. He gave us quotes for the other items, but he wasn't competitive on some of those other items. So we got that from other people.
Okay. Yeah, that paints a very different picture than the one that I got from watching the movie.
Right. Yeah.
One thing we do see in the movie is you actually go to Albania to inspect the bullets, and there's a screen. And then after that, we see AEY's bid on the Afghan deal. There's a screenshot. I paused the movie to look on it in Excel. We can see the total bid, a little over $300 million. And the movie also mentions 3 separate audits and an in-person interview before actually getting the contract. The movie doesn't really focus on it much, but it does mention that it has to generate years of paperwork, or AEY, I should say, has to generate years of paperwork for those audits, because AEY didn't keep any records. So now that they have these government audits, have to do all that. And then basically, while you're there, you have to go to, I think it was Rock Island, Illinois in the movie. To actually talk to people, you and Efraim go there, kind of get high in the car beforehand, because it's a very stressful situation. So that's understandable. But then while you're there, you find out that you got the contract, but you also undercut the bid by $53 million. So then Efraim is all upset. That's an overview of how the movie shows AEY landing that huge Afghan contract. How close to the true story is that?
So as with everything else, it's partially true. um, we really did have, it was, I think, like 5 different audits. One was financial, where they want to see that we had the money capabilities. One was accounting. They want to see that we had like the record keeping thing, and that's what we had to, and we really did. So Efraim hired an accountant who just had happened to have been in federal prison, right? He just liked to have these guys. And that guy created like years of records by hand. So to make it look like he had been doing the accounting properly for the past few years. And so, yeah, that guy, I think it took him like a good 2 weeks to do that. So he created the all the records going back. And they actually sent a group of nice middle-aged ladies to our office that they were from the government. They were actually super nice. And we were super nervous because the government's going to come to visit the office. They're going to see we're a couple of kids, and and so we both wore suits, and we had our secretaries looking really busy and stuff, so we would look professional. And of course, Ephraim's he's a real charmer. He can be. He's a very, very personable person. So he starts joking with them. He's like, oh, ladies, I knew that you were, I knew that, over the phone, I could tell you were smart, but I didn't know you were so beautiful. I mean, if it wasn't so illegal, I'd definitely be buying you diamonds right now. And so they're all laughing, so he charms them, and they give us actually pretty high marks in that audit. They wanted us to come to Rock Island Arsenal, which is where the contract was being managed. And Efraim told me, he's like, hey, we're a couple of kids. We probably should, it probably might not look too good. So I'm going to go with Ralph, because Ralph's an older guy. Ralph's like in his 60s. So I didn't end up going to that meeting because Efraim wanted Ralph to be there to give him additional legitimacy. I don't know whether or not he smoked weed before going into that meeting. I didn't ask him, but it wouldn't surprise me in the least if he did, or even if he, snorted a line of cocaine, because he was doing a lot of that back then. So in fact, I would be surprised if he didn't snort a line of cocaine before that meeting. But we were told that we were $53 million under the next, or 52, I don't remember, under the next bid, but it didn't happen at that meeting. It actually happened. It was actually the guy the contracting officer told me over the phone. So, and the way it happened was I'm trying to remember what we were discussing, but we were discussing something, like I was asking him, whether we could do something or other. And he's like, yeah, we're really happy to help you guys out. You guys were just like, so competitive, you guys really kicked ass, of all your competitors. And I was like, really? And he's like, oh yeah, you guys were so much lower than everyone else. And I'm like, really? How much lower? And he's like, listen, I'm actually not really allowed to legally tell you this, but since we're just talking over the phone, I'm going to deny it if you tell anyone. Okay. But we're talking over the phone. I'll tell you. All right. He's like, you guys were $53 million under the next people. And I was like, holy shit. And so like, I'm like, well, we're just trying to get a good deal for the government, because, we're responsible contractors like that. And so of course I tell Efraim, and he was pissed. He was like throwing things at the wall. He was screaming. He's like, fuck, these motherfuckers. I could have made $50 million more. God fucking damn it. And he was pissed for like a whole day because of that. He was just like fuming. And then of course, I think that had to do some of it. He started, scheming of all different ways we could like increase the profit margins, and that's kind of what got us in trouble later when he tried to cut Henry out of the deal. By the way, Henry's real name was not Henry Girard. It was Henry Thomet, Thomet. Thomet. He's a Swiss guy, and looked very different than Bradley Cooper in the movie. And in real life, he looked more like a clean cut Swiss banker than the way Bradley Cooper portrayed him.
Most of us look different than Bradley Cooper. So
yeah. Well, I mean, I think Bradley, I read some interview with him that he was kind of trying to look like more hard ass in that movie. So like, that's why he's like all unshaven and he's got those super thick glasses and like bloodshot eyes. And, so he was kind of trying to do more of like an underground, like a criminal kind of vibe. But Henry actually was the opposite of that. He was very, very clean cut, professional, never raised his voice about anything, very quiet, calm, and ended every sentence with the word "okay" for some reason. He'd be like, "So the price for the AKs are good, okay? I can supply them by the middle of March, okay?" So it's like that. Yeah. Everything was okay.
Okay.
That's at the end. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Everything was like that. And he's very, very calm, never raised his voice, never screamed or went nuts or anything like that, like Bradley does in the movie. But yeah, I mean, he's been doing it. Henry has been in the arms business since he was like 18 and he was in his 40s at the time. So he's one of the most connected people in that business of anyone, particularly in Eastern Europe. But but he tries to keep as low of a profile as possible for good reasons. So there aren't many pictures of him out there. I think there's maybe one YouTube video of him giving some speech somewhere. So it's not like he's completely anonymous on the internet, but I think that's the only thing that's out there as far as I know.
Maybe you already answered my next question, but when Efraim gets all upset about losing that $50 million, that kind of goes to contrast earlier in the movie when he's talking about being happy living off crumbs and things that the other big defense contractors didn't want. And now with this Afghan deal, the movie even points it out, says, this is the whole pie. Was there something maybe that the movie doesn't show, or was it that missing out on that $50 million that he found out that was kind of like this change in being happy, from being happy with the crumbs to now you want the whole pie?
Well, I mean, I would say that Efraim's driving force at all times was greed. I mean, greed and power. I mean, that's kind of like what he lived off. And he was never happy with a deal, regardless. I mean, he was not happy with the crumbs. He was always trying to get more crumbs. He was always trying to, and the way he worked was that it wasn't really so much about the money. I'll give you a story that kind of illustrates his character. When I first started working with him, within like the first 2-3 weeks, I saw him. We worked out of his apartment, right, in his living room. And he would always talk on the phone with the phone speaker on, so I'd hear both sides of the conversation. I guess he just didn't like holding the phone up to his ear or whatever. I remember seeing him once get on the phone with AT&T and start, screaming and shouting and stuff because he felt like there was like a $5 charge on his bill that he felt should not have been there. And he kept on insisting, they said, well, they kind of pushed back. Well, this is our policy, whatever. And he's like, I want to speak to your fucking manager, and he kept on like insisting on going up the chain of command. Eventually, I think he got the $5 removed from his bill, but it took him like 45 minutes. Right. And, and it was like a whole drama, like he was yelling and screaming and the whole thing. And I told him afterwards, after he hung up, I said, Efraim, why are you spending so much time and effort on $5 overcharge? You could spend that time making God knows how much money, doing pretty much anything else. And, why are you wasting your time here? And he goes to me, he's like, it's the principle of the matter. Nobody fucks me. Nobody. So like to him, like it was much more of an ego thing than anything. And like I'd seen him like screw someone over through some various tricky means where he ruined the guy. The guy was crying on the phone that his business was going to go bankrupt and like, his wife is going to leave him and his kid is sick and whatever. And Efraim eventually used that whole thing in his own spiel when he tried to convince the government of things. But this guy seemed to be legitimate. And Efraim he just didn't care. And the only difference for Efraim, he was, after he hung up the phone with him, you know, he's like, well, I just made another 3% on my contract. And I'm like, oh, you did all that, you screwed this guy over, you ruined him for an extra 3%. And it's like, that's not going to move the needle for him. He's already got millions of dollars in the bank. What's a few extra $1,000? It's not going to do anything. But for him, it was about winning. That was what it was all about. It wasn't about the money. It was about winning. I mean, he hated spending money. He barely spent it at all, especially in the beginning. Later on, he started spending it when he knew he was going to go to prison, and then he started spending a lot of it. But in the beginning, he like was very cheap. Like he would eat at cheap restaurants. He, like didn't want to spend, like he barely had any clothes. He was driving like a secondhand used car, living in an apartment that was, not terrible, but nothing compared to what he could afford. So yeah, I mean, he just had this kind of like sickness that he just needed to like have just as much money in his bank account as possible. And he wanted to win. And that was really what it's all about.
Okay, that's, again, it seems a little different than, I think it was after the Beretta deal in the movie, where it shows his character and your character in the movie getting like matching Porsche 911s or something like that. And it's like, oh, we got this huge deal, man, start spending some money. So it seems like he's okay with spending money.
Yeah. Well, we didn't have matching Porsches, but we did both have Audis. They weren't matching. He had an A6 and I had an A4. So I had the less expensive version. But we did have matching Audis, I guess you could say. And we also did move into the same building. It wasn't as fancy as they show in the movie, but it was a pretty nice condo complex. Yeah.
Okay. So, make it, it's going to be on film in the movie. You got to make it look a little.
Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah. I mean, the building they show in the movie wasn't even built at that time. Yeah, I know what building they're talking about. In fact, that apartment, I saw it go on the market, and the marketing they used for it was the apartment that was featured in the film War Dogs.
Really?
Yeah. That's how the agent was selling it.
Wow.
Yeah, but yeah, that building was not even constructed at the time that this story took place.
In the movie, it's your character that goes. You go back to Albania to help actually facilitate this deal and with the logistics of it. And it's your character that notices that all the bullets are Chinese. And that means they can't be sold to the US government because of an embargo against China. So then Efraim comes up, he shows up in Albania, and he has this idea of taking the bullets. I wrote down the exact number they mentioned in the movie, 68,520 wooden crates. And he wants to put them into corrugated fiberboard boxes to help make it cheaper on shipping. And then we see AEY is hiring a team of like 50 people to repack the ammo over the course of 8 weeks, costing $100,000. So there's no more Chinese label on the outside. Also saves $3 million in shipping costs, going from the wooden crates to the lighter boxes. Seems like a good deal, except of course, repacking is not necessarily legal going around that embargo. So how well does the movie do showing the situation with the ammunition for the Afghan deal?
So it was pretty close. Yeah, I mean, I didn't go to Albania. The guy who we realized, so the way it happened was that in early 2007, there was a huge spike in oil prices, and Efraim had not bought any. He didn't hedge his bets. He didn't buy any insurance, so to speak. A big company, if you're really relying on a large transportation contract, like if you're about to like book 100 aircraft loads of to ship something, usually what they do is they buy insurance in order to counteract the movements of the oil markets, because like the vast majority of the cost of air freight is in the fuel, and if the oil price significantly moves, then your transportation costs could significantly change, which is what happened. So of course Efraim didn't buy the insurance because that's just not how he rolls, and so we were kind of stuck in a situation where we could not deliver this ammo at a profit. And so the AK-47 ammo from Albania, the grenades we were able to, because that was low volume, high margins, and one aircraft load of grenades was like $3 million worth, but an aircraft load of ammo was under $300,000 worth. So it's literally 1/10 the price. So the air freight costs change put us underwater on the ammo deal. So I realized, air freight is based all on weight primarily. And so if we could reduce the weight, we could save money and maybe get this section of the contract back into profitability. And we had gotten pictures from the Albanians of the ammo, and it was all packed in these very heavy looking wooden crates. And so I told Efraim, I'm like, hey, if we remove these crates, the ammo's still in these sealed metal tins. They call them sardine cans. We can just ship the sardine cans and get rid of all this wood, and maybe that'll be enough to make it profitable. And he's like, oh, that's a great idea. But but that's like a pretty big operation to repackage this stuff. So we need somebody on the ground. He's like, he's like, David, I need you here in Miami because you're dealing with the government. You're dealing with all the other suppliers for the other aspects of the contract. I don't want you going anywhere. But let's get someone else to go there. And so we decided to hire my friend, Alex Bedritsky, who was my childhood friend. We'd known each other since like third grade. And Alex he's dual citizen in France, with France, and he had spent some time in the French military. He speaks English, Spanish, and French, so he has 3 languages. Very smart guy, very very responsible and capable person. And so I said, hey, Alex is actually, he had just graduated. He has a master's degree in international relations. So, and he's a smart guy, military experience. Why don't we hire him? And so Efraim hired him, put him on salary, sent him over to Albania, and we got email back from Alex saying, hey, this is the situation with the ammo, because he had majored in international relations. He knew that there was an issue with Chinese ammo. And that's how we found out. So yeah, it wasn't me who was there.
And it seems like it was a lot more complex than the movie shows, which happens with movies.
Yeah, they have to. I mean, they have to simplify it. There's only so much you could put in an hour and a half. I mean, this is like 2 years of events compressed into an hour and a half.
Right. And characters too, like with Alex, and just compressing it into, okay, you're the one going because you've already been introduced.
Exactly. That's what the screenwriter told me. He's like, we don't want to introduce another character here. It's already, well into the movie, and so just keep the story simple. And that's why they sent me in the movie.
Well, things don't go so well in the movie. Once Efraim finds out that Henry Girard paid 2.5 cents per bullet for the Afghan deal, well, then he turned around and charged AEY 10 cents per bullet. So the way the movie sets this up, it's against your character's wishes in the movie. Efraim tries to cut Girard out of the deal. We don't exactly see how he went about doing that, because the movie follows your character in Albania while Efraim is in Miami. But we do see the result of it happening. You get kidnapped from the hotel, stuffed in the trunk of a car, driven to a deserted lot where Girard threatens you with a gun in your face. That's a scene the movie actually starts with, and then it comes back near the end of the movie to show that. Did that actually happen?
No. that never happened. And it didn't happen to Alex either. I mean, he didn't get kidnapped either. Efraim did try to cut Henry out of the deal. That is true. And the real numbers were actually that he was buying it from the Albanian Ministry of Defense for 2 cents a round, and he was selling it to us at 4 cents a round. So he was doubling his money. But we were selling it to the US government for 10.5 cents a round. However, the air freight was costing us, I think, like 5.5 cents a round. So we were still pulling in, and that was after the repackaging. So before the repackaging, it was going to cost us like 14 cents a round or something like that. And so we were going to lose money. But after the repackaging, it was, in total after the repackaging, we were paying, I think, about 5.5 cents a round in shipping costs. So we were clearing about 1 cent a round. Which gives it about a 10% profit margin. That was after the repackaging. So what happened was after we got the repackaging going, Alex found this guy named Costa, the box guy, and it started the repackaging. Things were going well. Efraim decides that he wants to make more profit on this deal, like he does with everything. And so he decides he's going to try to cut Henry out of the deal and deal directly with the Albanians. And so he tells me, he's like, okay, I'm going to fly to Albania and I'm going to convince them to give us a better price. He's like, what I want you to do is I want you to take, he's telling me, he's like, I want you to take all the quotes that you got from other people, from other sources, and I want you to doctor the documents and change it so it looks like we got much better prices from those other alternative sources. And so I do that for him. It wasn't particularly hard. I just get a PDF editing program and change the numbers. It wasn't hard. And print out the documents for him. He goes to Albania. He talks to the lead Albanian guy, a guy named Yili Pinari. And he's like, look, I have these other quotes. Alex was telling me this later because Alex was there. He's like, look, I have all these other quotes. You guys got to give me a better price. And Pinari looks at him. He's like, those documents are all fake. Don't show me your fake documents. He knew right away. He didn't even look at it. He was like, I know you're full of shit, and so he refused to give him a better price. And eventually, Efraim kept on bugging him. Eventually, Pinari's like, okay, fine. I'll tell you what. I'll make a meeting with the guy who can make this decision. And so he sets up a meeting with a guy named Deliorgi, who we found out later turns out to be part of the Albanian mob. And this meeting took place in this construction zone. It was like a building that was under construction, and they go into the construction zone, and then they open a door, and suddenly it's like a beautifully furnished office, out of Wall Street. And there's the Albanian guy, Deliorgi, at this table. And Alex told me that the second Diveroli walks into this meeting, he immediately got quiet, because Diveroli is a very brash and loud person, and always talking and always kind of joking around, and he also bullies people. He's a big talker. But Alex told me that, the second he walked into this office and saw this guy, he knew that he couldn't do that with this guy, with this mobster. He got really quiet and very respectful, which is very out of character for him. And the Albanian says, look, I know that you want better price, but we can't give you better price. But we know that you are repackaging ammo, and you pay this man to repackage ammo, and why don't you give this contract for repack to us? We make money on repack, and then I give you better price because we make more money from repack. And Diveroli's like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Sure, that guy's fired, you're hired, And Costa, of course, got really upset about that because he got taken off the contract. And he calls me up and he's like, hey, listen, I get it. It's business. You got to go with the person who gives you the better price. I understand, but can you at least buy my extra boxes from me? Because I made a whole bunch of boxes for you guys for this contract, but now you're kicking me off the contract. I'm stuck with $20,000 worth of boxes. So you're going to need these boxes anyway. Why don't you buy it from me? And I said, okay, yeah, that's very reasonable. I, appreciate you being, cool about this. And so I call up Efraim, like, hey, Efraim, why don't we just buy these boxes from Costa? And Ephraim's like, yeah, okay, no problem. I'll do it. Okay, yeah. Tell him I'll do it. So I tell Costa, yeah, he's going to do it. A week goes by. Costa calls me back. He's like, hey, Efraim hasn't bought the box. I call him like, Efraim, buy the fucking boxes from me. He's like, yeah. I'm going to. Doesn't do it, right? A third time, he calls me up. He's like, he's like, I really need you guys to buy these boxes. And Ephraim's like, yeah, I talked to Deliorgi and they don't want to deal with him. So fuck him. Just let him. He can keep the boxes. We don't need him. And I'm like, Efraim, just pay the fucking guy. He knows everything, He knows why we're repackaging the ammo, He can destroy us. And he's like, yeah, that guy's not going to do shit. Don't worry about him, Of course, that was the big mistake. And that guy did do something. He called up the feds and told them what we were doing. And he called up the New York Times and told them what we were doing. And his biggest mistake was that he called up the Albanian press and told them that that the Albanian politicians were getting kickbacks from this deal, which we didn't know whether it was true or not, but we assume that's probably how Henry got such a good price. And that's also probably why the Albanians refused to cut Henry out of the deal, even though Efraim asked them, because they were getting their kickbacks from Henry. Now, we didn't have proof of this. Henry never admitted this to us because it is illegal to bribe foreign officials. Even if it's not your own country, you can get arrested in the United States for bribing a foreign official. So it was probably a good thing we didn't know about it. And Henry didn't. We didn't ask, and Henry didn't tell.
Yeah.
But we assumed that's probably what was happening in retrospect. Eventually. So a few weeks after he told the Albanian press that, he ended up dead, the box guy. So it was the box guy that ended up getting killed, not the driver. There was no driver in the movie. It's the driver that gets killed to try to scare us or something. That's not what happened. There was no driver. There was just the box guy got killed, and that was because he ran his mouth to the Albanian press. And the powerful people in Albania didn't want someone claiming that they're corrupt, because corruption is like the number one political issue in Albania. It's a huge problem over there.
Well, for your storyline, as far as, at the end of the movie, we see things very quickly dissolve. You were in Albania with the whole getting kidnapped scene, but then after that, you head back to AEY's office, demand your percentage of the Afghan deal. It's about $4 million, according to the movie. You also want to leave the company. But the contract wasn't completed yet, so Efraim's like, I don't have that money to pay you right now. And then your character in the movie says, well, I'm willing to accept. You kind of negotiate. I'm going to do 40 cents on the dollar, like 1.6 million. We also see the movie makes a point of this written contract of a 70-30 partnership between you and Efraim, and then it just mysteriously disappears from your desk drawer. The movie doesn't show it, but we saw Efraim looking at it while you were in Albania, so it very heavily implies that he took that. And then later, there's the box guy thing, and then also we see Ralph Slutsky mediating a talk between your character and Efraim. Efraim offers like $200,000, split up over the next 4 years, hardly the amount owed. And so, in a fit of rage, your character then tells Ralph about the repacking the Chinese ammo in Albania, something he didn't know about. And then everything is just a whirlwind at the end. All of this really could be expanded a lot more in the movie, I'm sure, but it happens so quickly, because we find out that Ralph was wearing a wire. We find out that the box guy in Albania never got paid. And so he called the Pentagon, which I'm oversimplification based on what you're saying there. But basically, that's how the movie shows you and Efraim getting arrested. It seemed like a whirlwind ending to me that was like just a few minutes of movie time. Seems maybe they're just wrapping everything up in the movie.
Yeah, they had to wrap it up. That was changed dramatically of how it happened. As I said, I didn't go to Albania, so I was still in Miami. Once I think it was about a few months after the whole repackaging situation happened, and Efraim went to Albania to negotiate. He made this new deal with the Albanian mob and started getting them to do the repackaging. And so things were starting to, we were starting to fly like 3 aircraft loads a week of this ammo into Afghanistan. And that was on top of all the other stuff. So this is like from Albania. We also had a aircraft coming from Bulgaria every 1 to 2 weeks with grenades, and from Hungary and from various other places. And things were starting to really go smoothly, and it was just really a matter of managing the contract, making sure all the documents were in the right place at the right time, etc. And so this was like the first time in many, many months that I was able to have like a breather. It was like I wasn't working 18-hour days like I was for the last 5 months, and so I started coming into the office less, right, because I didn't need to. And so one day, the contract was going well. Everything was going well. Efraim comes into my office. It was late in the day. I was staying there late because I had to make some calls to overseas. And everyone else in the office was gone for the day. And he walks into my office and he's like, hey, a lot of the guys around the office are telling me that you're not pulling your weight around here anymore. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Who's saying that? Right? Because I was on great terms with everyone, with all our employees. I was known as the nice boss, and he was known as the asshole. Right? So like everyone would come to me and complain about him. Right? So I was like, there's no way they're talking shit behind my back to this guy. There's not a single person in the office who would do that. And so I'm like, who's saying that? And he's like, it doesn't matter who's saying it. Don't worry about that. But the thing is, you're not really helping. You're not pulling your weight. I'm like, what are you talking about? The Afghan contract is going great. We're delivering on a consistent basis. The government is thrilled. The money's coming in. And he's like, yeah, I know the Afghan contract's going great, but we're really struggling with the Iraq contract, and you're not helping with that. And I said, but I'm not part of that contract. I'm working on commission only here, right? I don't have a salary. I'm not responsible for every contract the company does. And he says, yeah, but if those contracts fail, the company could go under, and then that takes your Afghan contract with it. And I said to him, well, in that case, you want me to like work on everything? You want to give me a piece of the company? And he's like, oh, well, I wouldn't usually offer this to anybody, but you're my best friend, and you're the only guy I would even consider doing this for, So why don't we do this? I'll give you a very generous $100,000 a year salary as an executive of AUI, and you get 1% of the company. And I said, 1% of the company, I mean, 90% of the company's profits for the next 2 years minimum is going to be the Afghan contract. And you owe me actually 25%, not 30. You owe me 25% of that contract. So I think I'll stick with my 25% of the 90% of the money than 1% of 100% of the money. And he's like, well, that's just not going to work. We can't do that. And I said, well, I mean, we have an agreement. And he says, well, you could take it or leave it. How about 0? And I said, okay, if that's how it's going to be, I'll see you in court, you piece of shit. And I walked out. And I was extremely tempted to punch him in the face. And, it's just like the smug look on his face. And I was so he hadn't paid me anything until this point, because all the money that we had made in previous contracts together, he rolled into the next contract. Because the way he put it, what he was like, hey, I'm using my own money to finance this deal. As you make money, it's only fair that you use your money to finance the deal too, to the best of your ability. And I was like, okay, I guess that kind of makes sense. It's not that much money comparatively, but, so I agreed to do that. But because of that, I didn't have a penny from all the work that we had done in the last 2 years. And I had been living off my savings. That $100,000 was down to $30,000 at this point. So, and dwindling fast. And at this point, my daughter was like 6 months old. And so I had a kid to support. And so I went from thinking I was very shortly going to be a multimillionaire to about to go literally bankrupt and, going down to 0. So it was a huge, huge shock and a huge, blow. And I was like depressed for weeks after that. It was one of the hardest times in my life, because I didn't know what to do. I was like, I got to get a lawyer, but the lawyer needs to get paid, and I don't have money to pay a lawyer, and all this stuff. And I was like, is he just going to walk away and get away with this? And eventually one of my dad's good friends was a very high-powered lawyer and agreed to take on my case, and started negotiating with him. And we negotiated he owed me about $5 million. It was about $5 million that he owed me. And we negotiated, and he was willing to give me $300,000. And obviously that's ridiculous. But at this point I was like, you know what? 300, rather than going through a lawsuit, which could take years, and who knows if I'll ever end up collecting, because who knows, this guy could end up dead. The way he does business, he could end up bankrupt, the way he could end up in prison. I mean, those are all very good possibilities. So better to have $300,000 now than maybe nothing later. And so I agreed to it. just to be able to have something so I wouldn't go bankrupt and be able to support my kid and move on with my life and start a new chapter in my life. And we were about to sign the contract to get to do that agreement. And the day we were supposed to sign the contract, I get a phone call from one of the secretaries at the office, and she tells me, "Hey, I just wanted you to know." I hadn't been working at the office for 2 months at this point. This is 2 months later, and I want you to know that. Yeah, but I was still on good terms with all the employees, you know. So she called me up. She didn't have to, but she called me up, and she's like, "I want you to know that the federal agents just raided the office." And they told everyone to step away from their computers and get out of the office, and they're collecting everyone's computers and all the filing cabinets. They're boxing everything up. So just wanted you to know. And I was like, holy crap, you know, the shoe has dropped. We're screwed. And so I call up Alex, who's still in Albania. And, you know, Alex is my best friend. And so I tell him, "Hey, Alex, you know, I just wanted you to let you know that you know, the feds raided the office." And he's like, "What?" He's like, "What?" Because like in Alex's mind, it wasn't even necessarily illegal what we were doing, right? Because I mean, yes, there was an embargo against Chinese ammo, but the ammo that we were buying from Albania had been given to the Albanians in the 70s, before 1989, which was when the embargo was put in place. So it was actually legal when they gave it to the Albanians. And so you can buy Chinese ammo legally in the United States, or a Chinese weapon legally, as long as it was imported before it was made illegal, before the embargo. So technically, as far as the embargo was concerned, this ammo was legal. However, our contract with the U.S., our commercial contract with the U.S. Army, specifically stated no Chinese ammunition could be delivered either directly or indirectly under this contract. So that was the so that because now it was, they put that in there because of the embargo, but they didn't actually mention the embargo anywhere in the contract. It just says no Chinese ammo, period. So we figured, oh, this is probably just a violation of our commercial contract terms, which is not necessarily criminal, right? It's just it's a breach of contract, really, is what it was. And so in Alex's mind, you know, he was like, well, you know, I mean, might be a breach of contract, but that's Efraim's problem. He owns the business. I'm just an employee. He could deal with the lawsuit or whatever the Army wants to, if they even care, right? Which they really didn't. Until they had to, that is, but then he realized, hey, the feds are raiding the office. So he calls up. So he's like, okay, let me see what's going on. He calls up the office. He calls up Danny. Danny is the guy who Efraim replaced me with after I left. And so he calls up Danny and he says, "Hey, Danny, I need, you know, these documents for there's an aircraft landing in a couple hours. I really need these documents in order to take care of the export permit. Can you get me these documents?" Because he knew that everyone had been forced out of the office by the feds. So he's like, "I need these documents, you know, just to see what would happen." So Danny, he hears, Alex told me this later, Alex hears Danny cover the mouthpiece of his phone and whisper to Efraim, hey, Efraim, it's Alex. He needs these documents. Or what should I tell him?" And he hears Efraim going, "Oh, well, we can't get those documents now. The feds are there. So why don't you tell him that, yeah, there was a bomb threat. Yeah, tell him there was a bomb threat at the office. And so we all had to leave. And so we can't get him the documents now, but we'll get it to him in a few hours. Okay. Yeah. Tell him there's a bomb threat." And so Danny gets back on the phone. He's like, "Yeah, there was a bomb threat. So we'll have to get that to you later." And Alex is thinking, why is Efraim lying to me? Right? Why doesn't he tell me the truth? Maybe he's planning on blaming me for everything, on making me be the fall guy. I mean, I'm the guy on the ground. I'm supervising the repackaging operation. Efraim's going to claim he didn't know anything about this, and this is all my fault. I'm not going to take the fall for this motherfucker, you know? So he's on the next plane back to the United States. And then I get a call from the federal agents, and they say to me, they're like, "Hey, you know, we interviewed some of the other employees at your company, and they said that you had left on bad terms. We would love to talk to you." So of course I call up, I hire a defense attorney, a criminal defense attorney, and I say, "What should I do? Should I talk to the feds or not?" And my defense attorney says, "Well, first thing you have to do is you have to go through your emails and your text messages and search for all the keywords of all the things that you think you did wrong. and see what kind of evidence there is, see what kind of things they're working with here. So I searched in my email. I searched for Chinese ammunition, repack, and it turns out there was quite a lot of evidence. There was direct emails from Efraim to Alex with me copied on it, saying, "Make sure you remove all the Chinese documents from inside the thing. We can't have any Chinese markings." Like it was very, very blatant. And so I realized, well, they've already got all the evidence, so there's no way we can deny that we were doing what we were doing. And I told my lawyer that, and my lawyer's, well, look, if the evidence is rock solid, then your best bet is to just cooperate. You can't fight them, because they're gonna, if you fight them, you're gonna get destroyed. And anyway, do you have a few $100,000 to pay a good defense attorney for your case? I'm like, no, I don't. I have less than 30 grand to my name. He's like, well, in that case, it's not even a choice. You can't even if you were innocent, you couldn't defend yourself. So and he's like, and you're not innocent. So just, come clean and hopefully it won't be too bad. And so we set up a meeting with the feds, and the way they work is they tell you, and they interviewed Alex and me separately, of course, but so they could verify our stories against each other. And they tell me, it's like, this is the way it works. If you're going to cooperate, you're in 100%. There's no half cooperating. You tell us everything. And if we find out that it was like, if you cooperate and you do everything well, we're going to go as easy as we can on you. We'll tell the judge to go easy on you. In fact, we don't even plan to charge you. We're not even going to bring charges against you. You're just going to be a witness. You didn't benefit financially from this. So, we see no reason to make you a target of this investigation. But if you lie to us, or if you leave anything out, right? If you omit any information that we know, and we think that you're hiding it from us, your deal is invalid. And then we go hard after you, and we'll try to fuck you as hard as we can. Right. And so I was like, okay, I'm sufficiently scared. Let's do this interview. And I told them everything I knew. And at the end of the interview, they like, well, just so you know, because I ended the whole interview with the whole issue with the Chinese ammo. And I was like, oh, that's the most serious thing I can think of, that what we're doing is this whole Chinese ammo thing. And they're like, just so you know, we knew about the Chinese ammo because when we raided the office, we found a to-do list on Efraim's desk written in his handwriting. And one of the items in the to-do list was repackaged Chinese ammo, Albania.
It's pretty obvious. Wow.
Yeah. So it was, so he's like, we knew about that, So anyway, after that, so they told us, okay, you gave us all the info. That's fine. We're still not sure what we're doing about this case. We'll do our best not to charge you. We don't think that you deserve to be charged. You're not a target. So I'm like, great. So I set up my own company to do government contracting. I figured, if I know this business, I might as well do it. As soon as the feds raid the office, my lawyer says, you can't take a penny from Efraim. This deal is done. Until all the legal issues are resolved, because the last thing you want is for it to look like he's paying you off to keep quiet. So that destroyed that. And so I had to get a job, but I also I got a job at a food bank.
So this is before you got that 300,000 that you had agreed to then?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
I still didn't get a penny from him.
Okay.
And then my lawyer says you can't take anything from him until all legal issues are resolved. And so I had to get a job because, I was quickly running out of money. And I started my own company on the side, and I was working on winning government contracts. And about 6 months later, we hadn't heard from the agents in months. I figured, maybe they're not going to do anything about this investigation. Maybe they're just going to let it slide. I mean, who knows? They're just not doing anything. So about 6 months later, I get a phone call, and it's a New York Times reporter. And he says, this guy named CJ Shivers, and he says, hey, we are investigating the story about AEY delivering Chinese ammunition to the U.S. Army in Afghanistan. He's like, do you have any comments on that? And so I quickly hang up the phone and I call up my lawyer and I tell him, hey, I just got a call from the New York Times. Well, what should I do? And my lawyer says, absolutely don't talk to any reporters ever. Don't talk to any reporters. That's the worst thing you can do. So I said, okay, I won't talk to any reporters. About a week later, the New York Times publishes a front page article, and it has my mugshot and Efraim's mugshot side by side on the front page of the New York Times, next to a picture of rusty looking ammunition. And the New York Times article said that we were delivering, all the ammo we were delivering was rusty and low quality, and it was dangerous, and we were putting our Afghan allies in danger by delivering this low quality stuff. And it just proves how incompetent the Bush administration was, because they gave a couple of 20-year-olds this enormous contract, and look what happened, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in reality, that ammo that they had on the cover of the New York Times was not even the Chinese ammo. It was Bulgarian ammo. And it was only about 30,000 rounds of ammo. We're talking out of like 150 million. 30,000 rounds of ammo that this stuff was. And the reason it got there was because Efraim had found this ammo in Bulgaria at a super, super, super cheap price. And it was such a small quantity of ammo, it wasn't really worth flying there to inspect it. And we already had extra room on the plane coming out of Bulgaria because we had a grenade shipment. So his thinking was, you know what? I'll roll the dice. I'll buy this stuff, stick it on the aircraft. If the government inspects it and accepts it, great. We just made a great profit margin because the stuff is so cheap. If they reject it, no big deal. It's super cheap anyway. And so the government inspected it, and of course it was junk. And so they rejected it. They didn't pay us for it. But of course, Afghanistan has no ammunition recycling facilities, so they had nowhere to put it. And so they put it to the side of the airport. When the New York Times came to investigate and they started asking questions about us, someone pointed out that ammo. They're like, oh yeah, that's some of the ammo AUI delivered. And so of course that's where the picture came from. And the implication by the New York Times was that all the ammo we were delivering was this low quality stuff, which was not the case. The government was very happy with the quality of the ammo. They issued it to the Afghan allies, and it was used. So after that New York Times article came out, suddenly the army made a statement. We had no idea any of this was happening. We're going to remove this. We're going to take this contract away from AEY and put it out for open bid on the market again. And the Justice Department 1 week later decided that they were going to charge us with fraud, for defrauding the United States by lying that it was Chinese, that it was not Chinese ammunition, while it was Chinese ammunition. Now, during the legal fallout, Ralph was portrayed very wrongly in the movie because he was the only guy who didn't plead guilty. So I pled guilty. Alex pled guilty. Efraim eventually pled guilty as well because he knew there was just no way to avoid it. But Ralph decided that he was going to fight it in court. So actually pretty much the opposite of what they show in the movie. In the movie, he's wearing a wire and trying to entrap Efraim and me, but that's not actually, it's actually the opposite. Ralph fought them in court, and he ended up losing. He actually had to go to trial twice because the first trial was a hung jury, and then they had to do it again. And he got convicted on the second trial. And he claimed he had nothing to do with it. He had no idea, but unfortunately for him, there was a whole bunch of email evidence stating otherwise. In fact, there was an email from him with detailed instructions of how to erase Chinese markings from wooden crates. And he even had like pictures of like how it would be done with like a wood sander. So there was really solid evidence.
The YouTube tutorial on how to do this, right?
For real. I mean, he literally, that was one of the evidence emails they used in court. And I mean, I think it was a big mistake on his part to fight them. He ended up losing. He ended up serving 4 years in prison. But if he had pled guilty, he probably would have gotten just, probation or house arrest, which is what I ended up getting. So yeah, I mean, the way it worked was, so during the trial, it came out in court that the army was informed immediately by the Justice Department right after that raid about what was happening. They were informed. There was an email going from the Justice Department to the Army saying, "Hey, this ammo you're taking delivery on this contract is originally Chinese. You should know that. Perhaps you should stop taking delivery of that ammo." And the Army responded to them. This all came out in court, these emails. The Army responded to them saying, this ammo is critical to the mission in Afghanistan. And if you want us to stop taking delivery on it, we're going to need a letter instructing us to do so from the Attorney General of the United States. And the Attorney General of the United States, who was the head of the Justice Department, never sent that letter. So for what reason, we don't know, but he never sent the letter. So the Army kept on taking delivery of the Chinese ammo from Albania, well after they found out it was Chinese, for the next 6 months. They kept on taking delivery for 6 months after they found out. And then as soon as the New York Times article comes out 1 week later, they're like, "Oh, we had no idea. We had no idea." Like, of course, they knew the whole time, and they didn't really care. They were getting good quality ammo at the best possible price, and that's what they wanted. It was only the New York Times forced them into it because it became a huge political scandal. So when they decided to charge us, the way they worked was they said to me and Alex, "Hey guys, we know that we told you that we weren't going to charge you, right? Unfortunately, we think you guys were just too involved in the whole scheme, so we can't charge Efraim without charging you too. We're very sorry, but keep on cooperating, and we'll ask the judge to go as easy as possible on you." And these are your options. The way they put it was, you guys delivered 71 aircraft loads of this Chinese ammo, and each aircraft that you delivered had a document that went along with the shipment called a certificate of conformance. And the certificate of conformance had listed on it the type of ammunition that was in the plane, the quantity of ammunition, the year of manufacture, and the place of origin. And in place of origin, we put Albania. And Efraim signed the document, and I submitted it to the government. And they said, "And you guys knew that this was false. You knew that the original place of origin was China. And not only did you know, but you had this whole elaborate operation to disguise that fact. And therefore, we consider each document that you submit an act of fraud." And you did this 71 times. So that's 71 acts of fraud. And each act of fraud can give you up to 5 years in prison. So potentially you're looking at a 355-year sentence. And so I was like, holy shit, I can spend the rest of my fucking life in prison. And then they're like, "But if you plead guilty, we have the leeway as prosecutors to combine all these 71 acts of fraud into one act of fraud. So the max you'll be able to get is 5 years in prison. And because you're cooperating and you pled guilty, we'll tell the judge to give you the low end of the guidelines. So maybe you'll do a year in prison, maybe you'll do nothing. Maybe just probation." And so that was the choice: either the rest of your life in prison or maybe nothing, but as long as you plead guilty. And so, of course, with those kind of choices, we pled guilty. All three of us pled guilty. And Efraim probably would have gotten, so I ended up getting sentenced to 7 months of house arrest, which was a huge relief. I thought I was going to get like a decade or two in prison, and ended up just getting 7 months of house arrest. Didn't do any prison time. I'm extremely grateful for that. Efraim probably would have gotten somewhere in the same neighborhood, maybe a little more, but nothing too crazy. But he, while he was awaiting sentencing, so it was a 3-year period from when the New York Times article came out until we got sentenced. And the reason it was so long was because Ralph decided to take it to trial, and then they had to do the whole trial preparation, and then the trial, and then he had a hung jury, and so they had to do another trial, and so that's why it stretched out to like 3 years. But during that period, we were out on bond, right? So we had to go down to the courthouse. They arrested us for like a few hours, and then we had to post bail. And so, but part of the bond agreement is that you can't leave the district. You can't leave South Florida. And they also told us, you guys can't do any business in this industry. You can't do any business in the defense industry, and which really sucked because I was about to win my first multi-million-dollar contract. I was like literally, again, one day away from, I was in the final stages of getting this contract awarded to me. I was going to make like $1 million, 1.5 million and a half, $1.5 million on it. And the day that I was about to like get the contract awarded, the New York Times article came out. And so then the Army put that contract on hold and eventually canceled it because of the pending illegal issues. So once again, I was so close to making a lot of money, and it was just snatched away from under me. And so, of course, we couldn't be in that business. But Efraim, of course, being Efraim, decided that he's going to stay in the business, just do the business under someone else's name. So he got a new guy. He had already screwed over Danny, and the guy he replaced Danny with. He just went through people, one after another. And he had a new guy that he was going to work with, and he registered a company under that guy's name and started doing deals under that company. And eventually, he tried to do a deal with someone with Knight Industries, I think it was, who was based in like Central Florida. And but Efraim's like such a control freak that when it came down to negotiating the details of the business, he couldn't let his friend, who was the front man, do the talking. He insisted on getting on the phone himself and doing the negotiations himself. So the guy eventually finds out who he is and Googles him and realizes that this guy's got, he's already pled guilty to this, and he's probably, is pending sentencing. And so the guy he's talking to I assume was thinking, well, he's probably trying to entrap me into something in order to get his sentence reduced. So the gun dealer who he's talking to calls up the ATF, right, the Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms Administration, who's in charge of regulating guns. And he tells them about what's going on. And the ATF tells him, oh, that's really interesting. Why don't you introduce one of our undercover agents as your business partner? And so he introduces the undercover agent. The undercover agent insists that Efraim come up to Orlando to shake hands, to meet in person, to do this deal, knowing that Efraim was not legally allowed to leave South Florida. So Efraim agrees to come up to Orlando, and the agent tells him, hey, why don't you bring some of your handguns with you? Because he knew that as a convicted felon, you're not allowed to be in possession of a firearm. That's a felony. You can get up to 10 years in prison for that. So the agent is like, why don't you bring up some of your handguns? We'll go shooting at the range. And Efraim tells him, he's like, look, I can't be in possession of a gun. I already pled guilty, so don't ask. I can't bring any handguns. I'm not going to bring any handguns. He's like, yeah, come on. Let's do it. And he's like, no. And he's like, stop doing this. You're going to ruin the deal. Don't keep insisting I bring guns to the meeting. And he's like, okay, fine. Just come to the meeting. Goes up there. The undercover agent, shakes his hand. He's like, hey, it's like, hey, I know you didn't bring any guns, but check this out. I just bought this latest HK handgun. It's the latest cool thing on the market. Check this out. And Efraim is like, oh, yeah, I heard about that. That's so super cool. Oh, I'm so glad you brought that. He's like, let me see that thing. And he picks up the gun and he's like, oh, I got to shoot this thing. Let's go to the range and pop off a few rounds. He's like, well, what can I say? Once a gun runner, always a gun runner. Am I right? And the agent slaps cuffs on him and he's like, you're a felon in possession of a firearm. You're under arrest. And so he got arrested for that. And he could have gotten 10 years in prison for that one thing, plus an additional 5 years for the fraud charge, which he had pled guilty to. He hired the best attorneys in Miami, spent like $2 million on attorneys, and got it negotiated down to 4 years. So he ended up serving 4 years in prison. And now he's out and about screwing people left and right, as he usually does. I every once in a while someone contacts me. It's like, oh, I just got screwed over by Efraim. I tried to do this deal and now I have to see him. I'm like, yeah, you fucking got yourself into that. You didn't know that about him before you got into business with this guy, you know? So he's still his old self. He's still doing deals. I heard that currently he's mostly involved in funding lawsuits because so many people have sued him and he's sued so many people that he's really well versed in the legal system. So now he's in business of funding lawsuits, and I'm sure he takes 90% of the money and probably 100% when all is said and done, because that's just how he rolls. But yeah, I mean that's how that ended. But for me, it actually was a huge blessing because while I was under house arrest, house arrest actually set me up for the business I'm in, which is a really amazing turn of events. Because while I was under house arrest, I was obviously, I had like the ankle tracking thing. And if I like once left my apartment to go throw the trash down the garbage chute, and I get a very angry phone call from like my probation officer, you're out of your zone that you're not allowed to be out of, And so anyway, I was, at home bored, and I'm a musician. I play guitar. I'm a singer as well. And I was playing a lot of music to pass the time, inviting my musician friends over. It's not like a COVID lockdown. You can have people visit you, so it's not so bad. And definitely is a million times better than prison. And so I invite my friends over, but of course, none of my drummer friends were going to bring their drum set. So because that's a huge pain in the butt to move, and I was living in a small apartment, my neighbors wouldn't have been happy about it either. So I bought a drum machine, which is an electronic device. It goes on the table and it has a bunch of buttons on it. You can make different drum sounds with it and make a beat out of those sounds and play it back in a loop so that you can play your guitar to it. And so I did that. But every time I wanted the beat to change, I had to stop playing my guitar, press a button on the machine to change the beat, and go back to playing my guitar. And it just interrupted the flow of the music. And so I thought, man, I really need this drum machine in like a pedal format so I could use my foot to change the beat and not have to stop playing my guitar. I was sure someone made something like this. So I went online to look for it, but couldn't find anything like it. And so I asked my musician friends if they'd seen anything like it. And they said, all of them said, like, I haven't seen anything like that, but let me know when you find it, because that sounds super cool. I want one too. And so I figured, well, if everyone wants it, nobody's making it. This is a huge opportunity. So eventually it took me 3 years, but I had it made. It's a product called Beat Buddy, like your buddy that plays the beat. You can Google it, one word, Beat Buddy. And it's the world's first guitar pedal drum machine. It allows you to control a beat hands-free while you play, and you could be a one-man band. So it's a lot. And it has, you could do, for the musicians in the audience, you could do drum fills by tapping the pedal. You hold the pedal down, it does a transition fill. You let go, it goes to the next beat. So you can control the beat live while you're playing. You could also add your own beats on it. It comes with software. You could add your own drum sets to make different sounds. So it's a pretty complex device. I mean, complex and I should say sophisticated, but simple to use. And we won. I had no money to do this. I was completely broke from paying all my lawyers to keep me out of prison. So I launched a crowdfunding campaign for it, and I'm extremely lucky. The crowdfunding campaign did really well, raised $350,000 in 1 month. It became like a record-breaking campaign in the music world, and that launched my company, Singular Sound. And since then, come out with 6 other music-related products. For the musicians in the audience, I'll mention what they are because no one else will know what I'm talking about. But we have the world's most advanced looper pedal. It's called the Aeros Loop Studio. We have the world's most versatile and easy to use MIDI controller called the MIDI Maestro, a cable management device called the Cably. You can find it all on singularsound.com. It's all, if I do say so myself, brilliant products that musicians will really enjoy. The one issue, so about 5 years ago, my brother and I, who helped me, I got into business with my brother when I started Singular Sound. I figured I'm done with these nasty partners. I need someone I could absolutely trust with my life. And so I started that business with my brother. But one thing we were always complaining about, to each other anyway, is that the music business, I should say the musical instrument business, which is, the business aimed at musicians, is relatively small. Because it's only like maybe 10% of the population would consider themselves musicians. And we make, high-end products. So only a portion of those musicians can afford our products and are interested in our products. So it's a very niche market. Now, we've done very well. I'm not complaining. We've won a whole bunch of awards. I've got to meet very famous rock stars who I admire, who use my products, and that's super cool. And so, yeah, and I've made literally millions of dollars from this company. I'm not complaining, but there is a limit to how much a company like that can grow. And so we were always thinking we need to come up with a product that is relevant to the general market, not to the musician market. We need something that anyone can use. And so one day we were hanging out at my house and we were smoking weed, as we do, and got the munchies and started eating mangoes, because their mangoes are juicy and delicious and sweet. Great food for when you have the munchies. The problem with mangoes is that they're very fibrous. So you get these fibers stuck in between your teeth. And so my brother asks me, he's like, hey, and do you have any dental floss? I need to get rid of these fibers in between my teeth. So I'm like, yeah, I need some too. So we go to my bathroom. We're both flossing our teeth in the mirror. And I'm complaining to him. I'm like, man, this is such a pain in the butt. Like, if we could invent a machine that can floss your teeth for you, we would make so much money. Everyone would want that. And he looks at me, he's like, yeah, that is the ultimate general market product. We have to come up with something like that. And so we start brainstorming and we come up with all these crazy ideas that would have never worked. But eventually we come up with a design, and I'll show it to you. I'll hold it up to the screen for people who are watching this on video. It's called the InstaFloss, like Instagram, but flossing. And what it is, it uses 12 water jets. It's in a H-shaped manifold. It shoots the water jets from both sides, from the outside of the teeth and the inside of the teeth, both top and bottom rows. So you just have to bite into it like this, and it turns, so it swivels with your teeth. And you're done, right? So 10 seconds, you just slide it across your teeth, and the water jets get rid of all the stuff in your teeth. So in 10 seconds, you can have a full floss. So InstaFloss, instafloss.com. Tell your friends. Check it out online. So we've been working on that for 5 years. And it was the hardest product I've ever created, because it's a lot of water pressure and vibrations. And we had a lot of issues with making it not leak and making it function properly. And the water droplets had to be shaped in certain ways, the channels. It was actually way more complicated than we thought going in, but that's everything. But we are just starting to deliver. We actually just delivered to the first 5,000 customers. So we did a crowdfunding campaign too for that, and we raised $1 million for that product. Yeah, so it was a very big success. And we just delivered to the first 5,000 people who supported us in the campaign. And so now we're getting ready to ramp up. So anyone who's interested in InstaFloss, go to instafloss.com. And recently, I just started my latest venture, which is more relevant to the War Dog story. So one thing, ever since the movie came out, I've had a lot of people contact me, like send me like messages on Instagram, on, various other places. And 9 out of 10 times they're like, please, they're like, I want to learn the business. Please teach me the business. I'll work for free. I'll give you 90% of the profit. I don't care. Just teach me, and I'm running these other businesses, Singular Sound and InstaFloss, and I don't really have time to take on apprentices. And anyway, I've been banned from doing government contracting for 15 years. That was part of my sentencing, is I was not allowed to do government contracting. I can now in 2022 is when it expired, at the end of 2022. So I am legally allowed to do it now. But I'm busy with my other businesses. But then I get about 6 months ago, I get a message from a guy named Logan. And he tells me, and his message was different than the usual. He tells me, it's like, hey, I just wanted to let you know that that my partner and I both watched War Dogs around 6 years ago, and when we were both 21 years old. And we were so inspired by the movie, we figured if these guys can do it and they're our age, why can't we do this? So we went in, got into it, and we bashed our brains against the wall for like 6 months until we finally won our first contract. And ever since, we've been winning contracts. And nowadays we have a multi-million-dollar government contracting business. And it's all thanks to the inspiration from War Dogs. So just wanted to reach out and say thank you. And I was like, holy crap, that's amazing. That's really incredible that they managed to do it on their own without anyone's help. And so they were like, maybe we can do something together. And I said, I have so many people who want to learn how to do this business, want to learn how to do government contracting. And there's the vast majority of government contracting is legal, right? I mean, all of it should be legal. You only find out if it's illegal if someone got in trouble. But most of the stuff that we did, with AEY, Efraim and I, all of it was legal until it wasn't. And it can be argued that even the Chinese ammo should have been legal because it didn't really violate the embargo. So the federal government has a budget of like $6.7 trillion. And they're the single biggest purchaser of anything on the planet. So if you know how to sell to the federal government, you can make a lot of money. There's enormous opportunities. And so people ask me, why would the federal government buy from some random guy, right? Why don't they just go directly to the company, who's making it? And there's a few different reasons for that. First of all, sometimes there's goods on the market that have just been sitting there that aren't owned by the company that manufactured it anymore. So for example, ammunition. Ammunition oftentimes gets bought by militaries just in case something happens. But most of the time, that nothing happens and their ammo starts getting older and they aren't comfortable having ammo beyond a certain date. And so they are willing to sell it. And so there's all this ammo that's being sold at well below the manufacturing cost by these different militaries. And sometimes other, like in our case, for example, with the Albanian case, they were looking to get rid of all their ammo because they wanted to join NATO. And the US Army was happy to take that ammo because they were giving it to the Afghans and they didn't have as stringent quality controls requirements for the Afghan allies as for their own US troops. So they were perfectly okay with taking ammo that was a few decades old, which, to be clear, was fully functional and was good quality. I'm not saying that there was any issue with the ammo, but most first world countries do have requirements and about how old they're willing to give the ammo to their troops. So there's opportunities such as that where the government won't get the best price from the manufacturer. They'll get the best price from the open market. And sometimes they want to buy a whole bunch of things that not one manufacturer makes. So they'll want to buy like 10 different items and have it all shipped to this particular place by a particular time. And there isn't one company that makes all that. So that opens the opportunities for middlemen to find all the sources, put together the package, figure out the logistics, and offer that to the government. And the way it works is they post on the website on sam.gov. Everyone can go check it out if you like. sam.gov, they post what they want to buy. And then once you are registered properly with the government, you are qualified to make that bid. And if you have the best price, is not always the best price. Sometimes it's a combination of factors. Sometimes they take into account delivery times and your past performance, your history of how reliable they think you are, and et cetera. And there's depending on each contract has its own set of requirements. But if you provide the best overall value to the government, as they call it, then they award you the contract. Then you can deliver those goods. and then 30 days later they pay you. That's how it works. So it's a pretty complex system. It's not easy to learn on your own, which is why I was so impressed that Logan and his partner James taught themselves this on their own. So we realized that there is a huge need for people who want to get into this business, and so we are launching War Dogs Academy, and which is an online course to teach people how to get into government contracting and how to be successful at it. WarDogsAcademy.com. You can check it out, and we are not only building a course, but we're putting up a forum so that we can create a community around it so that people can find potential business partners. And the biggest stumbling block for people getting into this business is financing, because you have to pay your supplier in advance and you have to pay your logistics provider in advance, but the government only pays you 30 days later. And so that's something, unless you have a lot of money, or you know someone with a lot of money, even if you win the contract, you won't be able to deliver it unless you get it financed. So that's another service that we are providing through War Dogs for our students in War Dogs Academy, is access to financing to investors to make sure that they are set up. And the thing that's beautiful about this is that we expect to make a lot more money from the financing than from the course. So we will only succeed if our students succeed. So we have a very large incentive to help our students succeed in setting up a successful government contracting business. And so I'm really excited about this. This is brand new, where it actually hasn't launched yet. I don't know when this podcast is going to be published, but it's going to be launched in the next few weeks. But you could already sign up to the course. We actually have a little discount for people who sign up in advance. And you just go to WarDogsAcademy.com. In fact, I've got some.
Awesome!
Right
The mugs there, yes.
The mugs there. We've got the bling, the swag. Yeah, the swag. WarDogsAcademy.com. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I'll make sure to include a link to that, InstaFloss, as well as Singular Sound. I really appreciate your time coming on to chat. Before I do let you go, I want to ask, because you, with Singular Sound, being a musician, you actually do make a cameo in the movie itself at the very beginning. So do you have any fun stories from being on set that you would like to share?
Sure. Yeah, that was really cool, actually. So they offered to me to do the cameo, and they wanted me to play, as in the movie, Don't Fear the Reaper, to a room full of 90-year-old people, because that was the joke. I thought at the time, I'm like, oh man, I'm a musician. I've also recorded original music. If anyone's curious, you could hear it on Spotify, Apple Music. Just search for my name, David Packouz. And I've recorded, I'm an original music a recording artist. And so I figured, well, this is my big chance. There's a movie being made about me. So I insisted on playing one of my own songs. And I was like, I want to play, one of my own songs here, so I get my music into the movie. And they told me, you either play Don't Fear the Reaper, or we're going to get someone else to do the scene. This is not an option. This is not a negotiation. This you don't have a choice. So I said, okay, fine. I'll do Don't Fear the Reaper. Fine. And so that was cool. Went out to LA for like 3 days. The way it worked is first it recorded the song in a recording studio, and then on the day of the shoot, it was actually really cool. They had that scene is recorded in this old church in LA, and it doesn't look like a church in the movie, but like it was recorded in this old church in LA, and it was on the second floor there was like steps going up to the second floor, and the staircase was like really nice and ornate wood, and they covered the entire pathway from the front door of the building all the way to the room where they were shooting the scene with paper. Like the floor, the walls, the banisters, everything was covered in paper. Like they taped it down so that all the people walking back and forth wouldn't damage the floor and the walls, because there's literally hundreds of people walking back and forth. And so, yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. The way they prepare it, and the thing that was really cool was they had outside of the building, they had these enormous like construction cranes, like three of them, holding these enormous mirrors that they angled to catch the sun and shine it and beam the sunlight into the windows. And then they sprayed like some like spray inside the room so that the sunbeams would be very visible. So it was just amazing, like that tiny little detail of just having sunbeams through the window that you only see for a few seconds on screen. They had like three construction cranes. It was just amazing the amount of money and effort they put into even these smallest little details. So like the way they did it was I got up there with my guitar and pretty much did more or less karaoke, guitar karaoke, where they would play the song on like speakers and I would like play along with it. And then while they were filming, at the end, after we were done, at the end, they wanted to do a few more shots of me, like some close-ups and stuff. So they didn't need the crowd, so they let all the old people leave. But the only way to leave the room was they all had to file past the stage, past where I was sitting. So they all were filing past me. And it was so funny. Like most of them just went right by and didn't say anything. But a few people stopped, and like one guy was like, I heard the lyrics of that song. I don't think it's very funny. I don't think it's funny. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't, it wasn't my choice.
Yeah.
And another guy had the exact opposite. He was like, oh, I just realized what you were singing. That's pretty good. Because we're a bunch of old folks. Don't fear the reaper. Ha ha. That's a good one. And then some like older lady was like, do you perform? I would love for you to come to my assisted living facility and give us a performance. And so yeah, it was really cute. It was really nice. So that was really neat. Met Miles Teller. He's super tall, by the way. He's like 6'3" or something. He's like ridiculously tall. Bradley Cooper's even like taller. He's like 6'4". So yeah, I mean, Miles was nice. And when they were filming in Miami, they invited me to go on set a few times just to like hang out, and that was cool. I was there for the scene where Dan Blazarian punches Jonah Hill in the face in the nightclub.
Okay,
because he's like hitting on his girl and all that. Yeah, so that was cool. That scene is so interesting to see them film that scene, because in the scene they're in a nightclub and they're like, they're talking to each other, like yelling over the music. They wanted to get. They're recording them. They want to get the vocals really clear. So they're yelling. There's actually, in real life, there was no music playing. It was dead silent. And they're yelling as if they're talking over the music. And everyone in the club is dancing as if there's music, but it's completely silent. And all you hear is them yelling at each other in this room. It was so bizarre. And of course, when in the movie, it's like, it comes out great, and it looks like they're in a nightclub and all that, but and with like loud music and everything. But it was just so bizarre to see them like filming that. And I was also there for this for two other scenes. I was there for the scene where they get arrested and get put into the cop cars. That's actually where I met Anna de Armas. And got my picture with her. Had to, right? My wife, right?
Yeah, exactly.
she and people always ask me this, and I can confirm she is just as beautiful in real life. She really is. It's not camera tricks or anything. The girl is drop dead gorgeous in real life, just as gorgeous. In fact, I would say even more gorgeous in real life, because she's, it's real. So yeah, I mean, she's really stunningly beautiful and very, very sweet and very nice. I mean, everyone was nice to me, but like, of course they would be. Why wouldn't they be nice to me? I'm the guy the movie was made about. So I make no judgments on anyone's characters based on the way they treated me in particular, but I have no complaints. They were all very, very nice.
Fantastic. Thank you again so much for your time. Before just real quick, can you give links to what you're doing right now again?
Yes. So my music company is singularsound.com. And my the flossing company is InstaFloss, like Instagram, but flossing, instafloss.com. And if you want to be a war dog, you can join me at wardogsacademy.com and learn how to do government contracting.
Fantastic. Thanks again so much for your time.
My pleasure.
This episode of Based on a True Story was produced by me, Dan Lefebvre. I'd like to thank David Packouz once again for helping us separate fact from fiction in the movie War Dogs. As David mentioned at the end, today he's running multiple businesses. One of them is Singular Sound, which has multiple products, including the one that he mentioned, the Beat Buddy, which, as a little side note, I actually picked up a Beat Buddy myself because, to give a peek behind the mic, I've started getting back into some music production, and the Beat Buddy will be a perfect companion for while I'm playing guitar. He also has InstaFloss, which he showed us in the video version on YouTube, as well as the brand new War Dogs Academy that'll help you learn how to bid on government contracts yourself. I've got links to those in the show notes for this episode, but if you're listening to this and you're driving or just unable to get there now, then you can always find them on the show's home on the web, basedonatruestorypodcast.com/307. You can find the video version over there too if you're listening to the audio version of this and want to see David showing the InstaFloss in action. Okay, now it's time for the answer to our two truths and a lie game from the beginning of the episode. And as a quick refresher, here are the two truths and one lie. Number 1, AEY doesn't really stand for anything like Efraim says in the movie. Number 2, the movie's screenwriter was the one who drove through the triangle of death, not David and Efraim. Number 3, David was not shoved into a trunk by Henry Girard like we see in the movie. Did you catch which one is a lie? Let's count it down and we'll start with number 3. David was not really shoved into a trunk by Henry Girard like we see in the movie. That is true. For one, as David pointed out, the character of Henry Girard was based on a guy named Henry Tomei. But in the true story, David never went to Albania. So, of course, he couldn't have been kidnapped and shoved into a trunk and threatened with a gun in his face like the opening scene in the movie. Next is number 2. The movie's screenwriter was the one who drove through the triangle of death, not David and Efraim. That is also true. Stephen Chin was one of the screenwriters for the movie, and he was the one who flew into Jordan and then got a driver to take him to Baghdad, taking him through the triangle of death. Of course, Stephen didn't go as a gun runner, so obviously they changed that story around for the movie too. That means number 1 is the lie. AEY really doesn't stand for anything like Efraim says in the movie. In the movie, we see Jonah Hill's version of Efraim Diveroli say that AEY doesn't have any meaning. He makes a joke that IBM doesn't mean anything either. It just sounds professional. And then he gets mad when one of his employees points out that IBM does stand for something. Well, as David told us, AEY also stands for something. It was a company founded by Efraim's father, who named it after the initials of his 3 sons. So the E in AEY is for Efraim. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. If you heard ads on today's episode, you can get rid of those by subscribing to the producer's feed. That's available natively in the Apple Podcast app just by tapping on subscribe on the show's page. Or if you're using any other podcast app, and as an added bonus, if you want the uncensored audio version that's also ad-free, you can access that on the producer's feed over at basedonatruestorypodcast.com/Patreon. Last, but certainly not least, if you got some value out of today's episode, you can learn how to give value back to Based on a True Story and help me keep it going over at basedonatruestorypodcast.com/value or by tapping on the value link in the show notes. That's all for today. Until next time, thanks so much for listening, and I'll chat with you again really soon.